The first encounter. The Zelnari Dominion had fought countless wars, their battle doctrines honed over millennia. To them, warfare was not an act of brutality, but a discipline of precision. Every movement, every strike, every retreat was calculated. They had fought and conquered species across the stars, always knowing the outcome before the first shot was fired. Then they met the humans. It began on the outer edges of Dominion-controlled space, near the gas giant Horus 7. A Zelnari patrol fleet detected an unknown vessel, an exploratory ship marked with the insignia of the United Terran Navy. Standard protocol dictated immediate engagement against unauthorized intruders. General Karath, a veteran of 100 campaigns, led the attack personally. His fleet of 3 war cruisers moved in a flawless pincer maneuver, forcing the lone human vessel into a kill zone. Their scanners confirmed the enemy's inferiority, primitive weaponry, outdated hull plating, and a crew of barely 100. Victory was a formality. The first barrage struck true. Plasma lances melted through the human ship's outer hull, sending debris scattering into the void. The Dominion fleet moved in for the final strike. That was when everything went wrong. The human vessel did not flee. It did not send a distress signal. Instead, it turned, engines flaring to maximum thrust, and charged directly at Karath's command ship. "This is illogical," his second-in-command hissed. "They have no chance of survival." Karath remained silent, watching. The human ship was crippled, venting oxygen and fuel, yet it moved with purpose, as though victory was still possible. In a final act of desperation, it opened fire, not with the disciplined precision of a retreating force, but with wild, erratic shots that ignored conventional targeting logic. A Zelnari warcruiser took a direct hit to its munitions bay. A secondary explosion rocked the battlefield as fire consumed the vessel, killing 2,000 warriors in an instant. "What?" Karath began, but before he could issue new orders, the human ship detonated itself. It had deliberately self-destructed in the heart of his fleet. The shockwave crippled a second warcruiser, leaving only Karath's flagship intact. Silence filled the bridge. The humans had no chance of winning. They should have surrendered. They should have fled. Instead, they chose mutual destruction over submission. Karath's claws clenched. He had fought warriors who valued honor, creatures that fought for their gods, empires that battled for survival. But this was something different. 3 days later, a full Dominion invasion force arrived at the nearest human colony, Outpost Vega 4. The mission was clear: wipe out the settlers and establish Zelnari control before humanity could retaliate. They descended in perfect formation, deploying mechanized shock troops to encircle the human stronghold. As expected, the colony was poorly defended. A few hundred soldiers, scattered defenses, outdated kinetic weaponry. Victory was inevitable. Then the humans began to fight back. And once again, everything went wrong. Instead of defensive formations or strategic retreats, the humans reacted with absolute chaos. They didn't hold the line. They didn't obey standard military logic. They improvised. A group of human soldiers feigned a retreat, only to lure Dominion troops into a narrow corridor laced with explosives. Others deliberately wounded themselves, using their own injured bodies as bait to lure in medics, before detonating grenades at point-blank range. The most unnerving part? They didn't stop fighting. Wounded humans continued firing. Soldiers with shattered limbs crawled into defensive positions. Even civilians took up arms, attacking with makeshift weapons, their faces twisted in defiance. Zelnari warriors, disciplined and precise, found themselves unable to predict human behavior. Every standard tactic was met with reckless, unpredictable counterattacks. And then, in the heat of battle, a captured human officer spat blood and grinned at his captors. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped, coughing. "We don't stop. You think this is a battle?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "For us, this is just another Tuesday." Karath stood over the dying human, staring down at him. This was wrong. No species fought like this. No species should fight like this. Yet here they were. His forces had secured the colony, But at what cost? Thousands of Zelnari warriors were dead, their strategic advantage rendered meaningless by human insanity. Karath turned to his second-in-command, voice low and grim. "Send word to the High Council." He exhaled sharply, watching human bodies litter the battlefield. "Tell them we may have made a mistake." Final scene. On a distant world, deep within Zelnari territory, the High Council convened. The message from General Karath played in the dimly lit chamber. Their reaction was unnatural. They fought as if death did not concern them, as if pain was irrelevant. What is wrong with human combat reactions? Silence filled the chamber. No one had an answer. The science of chaos. The Zelnari High Council had ruled for centuries with an unshakable certainty. War was an equation, and they had mastered it. Every species followed patterns, biological instincts that dictated their combat strategies. Some were cautious, some were aggressive, but all were predictable. Humans were not. The report from General Karath disturbed the Council more than they cared to admit. The footage from Outpost Vega 4 was analyzed 100 times over, and each time, the same conclusion emerged. Human combat behavior defied logic. The Dominion's finest military scientists were tasked with studying this anomaly. If the humans fought without reason, then reason would be imposed upon them. The study begins. In the research facilities of Zaltheris Prime, a team of war strategists and behavior analysts pored over centuries of human battle records. They examined wars from Earth's past, world wars, intercontinental conflicts, skirmishes in space. At first, the researchers assumed humans were simply reckless. But the deeper they dug, the less sense it made. Humans were not suicidal. They were not fearless. They experienced pain, fear, and loss just like any other species. Yet, unlike the Zelnari, who fought with precision, minimizing losses, humans embraced suffering as part of war. They adapted. They fought better when they were wounded, desperate, or outnumbered. And the worst realization? They won. The problem with predictions. Zelnari warfare revolved around predictive models. Advanced AI simulations determined the best course of action in any battle. But when the Dominion attempted to simulate human combat behavior, the results were catastrophic. A human soldier, when faced with overwhelming odds, should retreat. Instead, the AI simulations showed them launching desperate counterattacks, setting traps, and refusing surrender even in unwinnable situations. At first, the scientists believed it was a software error. They recalibrated their models, ran the simulations again. Each time, the humans broke the system. Their responses were too erratic, too varied. It was as if they did not follow a single instinct, but rather 1,000 possibilities at once. Even worse, when Zelnari war strategists attempted to predict human reactions, they began experiencing mental fatigue, their own biological instincts struggling to keep up with the rapid, shifting logic of human warfare. The realization sent waves of unease through the Dominion's highest ranks. War had rules. Humans did not care about the rules. The psychological puzzle. A breakthrough came when Dominion scientists studied captured human prisoners. Not through torture. Zelnari considered such methods primitive, but through psychological observation. The results were deeply unsettling. Unlike most species, humans could override their own instincts. Their brains, wired for survival, should have prioritized safety and retreat. Instead, they exhibited behaviors that made no biological sense. Fear-driven, yet fearless. Humans experienced terror, but instead of freezing, they acted, pain ignoring. Unlike Zelnari, who shut down when severely wounded, humans kept fighting. Their bodies flooded with adrenaline, pushing them beyond normal limits. A logical sacrifice. Most species fought for survival. Humans fought for something else: pride, vengeance, honor, or even pure spite. But the most chilling discovery? Humans adapted to war itself. While most species fought with tactics ingrained through evolution, humans invented warfare. Every conflict changed them. Every loss made them stronger. This went beyond strategy. This was a fundamental difference in how humans perceived reality. To the Zelnari, war was an equation. To humans, war was a mindset, a dangerous future. The High Council reconvened, reviewing the findings. The chamber was silent, save for the flickering holograms of battle simulations, each one ending the same way. Human victory. The council's elder, Vosrath, tapped his claws against the stone table. This is unacceptable. We have mastered war. This species cannot be allowed to disrupt the balance of the Dominion. A younger strategist, Zalcor, hesitated. Perhaps we should avoid war with them. A ripple of anger passed through the chamber. Avoid war? The Dominion did not fear primitive species. And yet, the data spoke for itself. Human unpredictability made them impossible to subjugate. General Karath, present via hologram, finally spoke. His voice was measured, but there was an edge to it. We have fought enemies who were stronger, smarter, more advanced, and we defeated them. His eyes narrowed. But this is the first time we have faced an enemy that is simply wrong. A decision had to be made. Would they attempt to contain humanity? Or would they strike now, before the chaos of human warfare spread beyond control? The answer would shape the fate of the galaxy. The test of war. The Zalnari Dominion did not hesitate. The High Council had debated containment, but in the end, there was only one viable course of action: extermination. Humanity was too dangerous. Their chaotic combat instincts threatened the very foundation of the Dominion's strategic dominance. If left unchecked, their influence would spread. Their unpredictable nature would infect war itself. The solution was simple: wipe them out before they could become a greater threat. The invasion begins. The Dominion launched a full-scale assault on human space, deploying fleets to key Terran strongholds. Their first target, New Dawn, a well-fortified colony orbiting a red dwarf star. The humans had built powerful defenses, but the Dominion had overwhelming firepower and superior tactics. It should have been an easy victory. It wasn't. The battle for New Dawn. The Dominion's warships arrived in perfect formation, deploying shock troopers to the colony's surface while orbital bombardments rained down. The initial strike was devastating. Cities burned, communication relays shattered, human forces scattered. But then the humans reacted, and once again, everything went wrong. Instead of regrouping into defensive formations, the human military fractured into smaller, unpredictable units. Each fought in its own way. Some retreated, some charged head-on, some disappeared into the ruins only to strike from the shadows. Zalnari battle simulations predicted they would crumble. Instead, the humans became more dangerous. A platoon of human soldiers allowed themselves to be captured, only to overpower their guards and turn Dominion weapons against them. Engineers rerouted damaged power grids to electrify entire streets, turning the colony's infrastructure into a death trap. Pilots with disabled ships crashed them into Zalnari command centers, turning themselves into weapons. Even civilian populations refused to comply, forming militias that fought with reckless, terrifying determination. It wasn't just their tactics that defied reason. It was their mindset. A wounded Zalnari officer, bleeding out in the rubble, heard a human soldier laugh as he reloaded his weapon. "This is nothing," the human said, grinning through bloodied teeth. "You should have seen what we did to ourselves back on Earth." The Zalnari were not prepared for this, breaking the Dominion's will. The battle for New Dawn stretched into weeks, far longer than any Dominion campaign in recorded history. The humans should have been crushed within days. Instead, they kept fighting, kept adapting. Zalnari commanders began experiencing something they had never felt before: doubt. General Karath, overseeing the campaign, watched his forces struggle against an enemy that refused to break. The human death toll was staggering, yet they fought harder the more they lost. This was not war, as the Zalnari understood it. It was something else, something terrifying, the speech that changed everything. As Dominion forces began their final push, the humans broadcast a message across the battlefield. A direct transmission from Commander Elias Voss, a decorated war hero who had survived dozens of battles. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, yet his eyes burned with defiance. "You think we fight like animals?" He exhaled, shaking his head. You're wrong. We fight like humans. He leaned closer to the camera. And that means we fight until you give up, or until there's nothing left of us to fight. Silence filled the Zalnari command room. Then, something impossible happened. Zalnari warriors began deserting. It was unheard of. The Dominion's military was built on discipline, on absolute obedience. But now, faced with an enemy that would not stop, some soldiers began questioning the war. The Dominion was used to breaking enemies. They had never faced an enemy that broke them instead. The turning point. The High Council watched the footage in stunned silence. Reports flooded in from the front lines. Zalnari warlords requesting retreat. Fleet commanders unable to predict human counterattacks. Entire legions paralyzed by fear. For the first time in Dominion history, a question arose. Could they actually lose? And worse, what if this war made the humans even stronger? General Karath, exhausted and grim, sent a final message to the council. We underestimated them. His voice was heavy. We thought we could erase them. He looked out over the battlefield, where human forces were still fighting, still adapting. But now I see the truth. He exhaled. We have made the worst mistake in our history. The Zalnari Dominion had sought to crush the humans before they could become a greater threat. Instead, they had forged humanity into something even more dangerous. And now, the Dominion had a choice. Continue this war and risk annihilation, or surrender. The cost of fear. The Zalnari Dominion had never surrendered. Not once in their long and bloody history. Their empire spanned thousands of worlds. Their military had crushed countless civilizations, and their strategies had been perfected over millennia. And yet, faced with humanity, they found themselves at the edge of defeat. Not because the humans had superior technology, not because they had greater numbers, but because the humans refused to break. Every battle waged against them had cost the Dominion more than they ever anticipated. Every plan unraveled in the face of humanity's raw, unrelenting defiance. It was not just their tactics, it was their mindset. The High Council had no choice. A decision had to be made. The last stand at New Dawn. The final hours of the battle for New Dawn played out under blood-red skies. The Zalnari had thrown everything they had at the human colony. More warships, more troops, more firepower. This was supposed to be the finishing blow. But as General Karath watched from orbit, he realized something horrifying. The harder they pushed, the more ferocious the humans became. Zalnari formations collapsed under waves of improvised human counterattacks. Soldiers who should have been dead on their feet kept fighting. Trapped human forces set fire to entire cities rather than let them fall into Dominion hands. Every Zalnari soldier that hesitated, that questioned the battle, was torn apart in the chaos. And then, in the heart of the colony, a human war banner was raised, a symbol of defiance, tattered and soaked in blood, but standing tall. It was over. General Karath clenched his jaw, fists trembling as the truth settled in. The Dominion could not win this war. Not because they lacked the resources, but because they lacked the will to keep fighting an enemy that did not know how to stop. A single thought echoed through his mind. This war is not breaking them. It's making them stronger. Karath turned to his officers, his voice heavy with finality. Order the retreat. There was a long silence. No one argued. The council's decision. The High Council was in chaos. Never before had the Dominion abandoned a war. Never before had an enemy resisted them so utterly. They demanded an explanation. Karath, exhausted and bloodied, stood before them and spoke the words that would change Dominion history. If we continue this war, we will lose. He let the statement settle, watching the ripples of disbelief spread across the chamber. We're used to wars with rules. We're used to enemies that surrender when the battle is lost. He exhaled sharply. Humans do not think that way. He gestured to the battle reports flashing across the holoscreens. They do not fight for survival alone. They fight for vengeance, for honor, for pride. And when we kill them, we only give them more reasons to keep fighting. The chamber was silent. Then, Counselor Vosrath, the eldest among them, spoke. You suggest we yield? The word was bitter, unnatural in his mouth. Korath shook his head. I suggest we leave them alone. The other counselors recoiled at the thought. The Dominion had never simply left an enemy alone. But what was the alternative? Continue the war until humanity adapted again? Until they found a way to turn their inferior technology into something even deadlier? Until the Dominion created something it could never defeat? They all knew what Korath was truly saying. The war had already been lost, not on the battlefield, not through tactics, but because the Dominion had seen the future, and it was human. The Treaty of Silence. A message was sent across human space. The Zalnari Dominion would no longer pursue war with humanity. They did not offer peace. There were no negotiations, only withdrawal. Human leaders were wary. The Dominion was too powerful to simply walk away from a war, unless they had realized something terrifying. And so, humanity did not celebrate their victory, because they understood the truth. The Zalnari hadn't left out of kindness. They had left out of fear, and that fear would never go away. Epilogue: The Future of War. Years later, a Dominion scholar recorded his final analysis of the human conflict. His writings were never shared publicly, deemed too dangerous for the general population. But his words remained. The humans are not the most advanced race in the galaxy. They are not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most disciplined. But they possess something no other species has ever mastered. Their combat reactions are not instinctual. They are not predictable. They are the product of a species that has spent its entire existence waging war against itself, against its world, against the very limits of survival. They do not fear death as we do. They do not break as we do. They are not a species that fights wars. They are a species that becomes war. The scholar paused, staring at the words he had written. Then quietly, he added one final line. And if they ever turn their eyes to conquest, God help us all.